WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
This is The Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Nick Austin. Today on the program, we'll take a look at the latest from Detroit City Council's budget hearings.
But first on The Metro, American car companies in recent years have invested a lot in electric vehicles. That became especially true when GM and Ford pledged to sell only zero carbon emission vehicles by 2035. But long before these companies made this goal, Tesla turbocharged the electric vehicle market until very recently. It sold the most EVs of any company around the world. Tesla's approach has been to sell high-end EVs. That thought went, make them luxury, and you can make them electric and make them appealing to more people. But that's no longer the case. According to Jamie Butters, executive editor of Automotive News and co-host of the Automotive News Daily Drive podcast, he says the company no longer maintains a luxury brand. But how true is this? And why is Tesla doing it? And what does it mean for companies like Ford and GM? To discuss this, we have Jamie here. Jamie, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, Tia. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So how did Tesla come to start out as a luxury brand in the first place?
Well, the strategy, right, the problem with EVs and the thing that makes them hard to sell is they cost more. Mm-hmm. They have really expensive batteries that cost a lot more than a regular engine and transmission and all the associated parts with that. So when Elon Musk took over Tesla, he was like, we're going to start at the high end with vehicles that we can charge enough money for that we don't lose money on all of these vehicles with these expensive batteries in it. So, some people didn't like the design. A lot of people criticized the quality of how the cars were built. But for an entity like Automotive News trying to evaluate the industry, like which segment are they playing in? And they're all like $100,000 cars. So it really made sense to put them in luxury. They were really competing against Aston Martins and Mercedes-Benz, even if some people were turning in Priuses to buy a Model S. If they're spending $110,000, they're luxury buyers, and that's kind of where they are. As the company got better, and their plan all along was to start at the high end and come down, but I don't know, there's a lot of skepticism about it. Would they really be able to do that? Would anyone ever really make a long-range, affordable EV? So they came out with the Model 3 and the Model Y that were kind of billed as mainstream, but were still really mainstream luxury. The Model 3 sold in the $50,000s, $50,000 plus. The Model Y was in the mid-60s. So still very much in that sort of Lexus, BMW, Mercedes territory. But last year, they really shifted gears and slashed the prices on the 3 and the Y. And now you can get a 3 for less than $40,000. Which used to be considered a luxury price, but really isn't anymore. The average vehicle in America, average new vehicle, sells for about $45,000. That's about where you can get a Model Y these days. So they've really repositioned themselves into the mainstream. And it's kind of always the plan, maybe not to do it exactly like this, but this is sort of the evolution of this company. They entered in the luxury market, but their aim is the mass market.
And why is it relevant to see the Tesla giving up its luxury status or trying to get into the average market with everyone else?
Yeah, well, the way Elon Musk described it in his master plan was to try to decarbonize the economy, right, and make the planet more livable for humans. And so, they didn't want to just sell 100,000, sell a few thousand like a Ferrari or, a few 100,000. They want to sell millions of vehicles a year where they can have the biggest impact on carbon emissions. And of course, they want to be big and awesome. Elon Musk had been talking about growing 50% a year, kind of indefinitely, although he later admitted no one can grow 50% a year forever. But clearly their plan is to be as big as Toyota or maybe twice as big as Toyota. So very big ambitions for this company. And it's something, everyone in the industry should be keeping an eye on. You can't just say, oh, well, if you're in Detroit, well, they're going to maybe take some sales from Cadillac or Lincoln, but they don't really touch the rest of it. They absolutely are going after all of the rest of it.
And I think about right now we're talking with Jamie Butters, the executive editor of Automotive News and co-host of the Automotive News Daily Drive podcast. Jamie, just want to know, I'm thinking about what you're saying and about the market and everything that's happening right now, the shifts that we're seeing. How much of this shift is caused by the Chinese company BYD and some of the sales that they've been able to produce outside of the U.S., which is now outselling Tesla with its cheapest electric vehicle at as low as $10,000. So how do you see this helping or seeing the shift our market here with EV sales?
Yeah, I think it adds to the pressure on Tesla and everyone else. Musk has cited it. He's warned that there could be a lot of damage to the auto industry if we don't have some market protections from low-cost Chinese vehicles coming in. But, one way or another, they probably will eventually. So right now, Tesla, Ford, Stellantis, Kia, they've all identified they are working on a sub-$30,000 electric vehicle that would be, appealing to American drivers. I think, the $10,000 BYD probably isn't going to be very attractive to an American buyer.
Yeah.
But their technology is really good, and they can offer things up and down the line. They've got really expensive vehicles, and they've got sort of middle-of-the-road vehicles. So they're going to be a tough competitor, and the companies are seeing it in Europe. They're seeing it in other markets. Not so much here yet, but you've got to be prepared to have a competitive vehicle.
And you talked about it just a little bit, how Ford and GM and Stellantis are adjusting to what they're seeing right now, of course, with BYD, but as well as Tesla. So how are we seeing this shift impact those markets for Ford, GM, and Stellantis in terms of EVs, especially when we talk about that sub $30,000 mark?
Yeah. Ford, Jim Farley talked about this in some broad strokes, the need that maybe they overestimated the high end of the market and really need to focus more on the low end. He said, the bigger vehicles, the 3-row vehicles that a lot of Americans like, are really hard to do with a battery-powered car because they get so heavy. They're heavier as the frame and the seats, and then you need a bigger battery, and then that battery adds weight. But if you do something more like Escape size, kind of, sort of like a Mach-E, maybe a little bigger, maybe a little smaller, but something, more of a crossover, and with some different battery chemistry, you can really get to a sweet spot in the market that is compelling for consumers. You think about a $25,000 to $30,000 car. There's hardly anything in the new market today for that price, even gas burning. So it'll be a real challenge to do a profitable EV for under $30,000. But if they can, we won't need the EPA to mandate EVs. A lot of people will just switch to EVs because they'll be cheaper, faster, quieter, cleaner, better cars.
So
we're not there yet, but that's what they're all working on.
Yeah, that's perfect segue here. Shifting gears to the last question is, what is the strategy for Ford and GM right now in terms of selling cleaner cars? Are they focusing a little bit more on hybrids, or are they really going to go head first with electric vehicles?
It's really all of the above.
Okay.
For the short term, it's all of the above. They're still got to sell a lot of pickups and SUVs to make the money to invest in those cheaper EVs. They're offering more hybrids and plug-in hybrids. GM's looking to get back into plug-in hybrids to reduce the carbon output and maybe strike a better balance for consumers while they figure out how to make EVs at a better price.
All righty then. Jamie Butters, executive editor of Automotive News and co-host of the Automotive News Daily Drive podcast. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. I know we will chat with you very soon.
Glad to do it.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. That is Tia Graham. I am Nick Austin. And coming up, we'll give an update on what's been going on with Detroit City Councils as it goes through the city's budgeting process. That's coming up next when we continue on the Metro.
Welcome back to the Metro here on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham. I am here with Nick Austin. We're going to get into a conversation about what's going on in City Council right now, Detroit City Council, that is. But first things first, this upcoming Friday at the Redford Theater, there's a special reunion show for the movie 8 Mile. You can expect on-stage stories from people involved in the Detroit-based shoot, as well as Detroit's own DJ Head, who produced songs for Eminem, Jay-Z, and many, many more, will perform before the screening and at intermission. The doors open at 7 and the movie starts at 8, and you can find tickets at redfordtheater.com, and I will also be the MC there hosting the event. So definitely come out and check it out and support WDET and support the Redford Theater.
Right on.
I was going to say, yeah, you know.
I'm with it, man.
Fun
I wonder
stuff.
if Clarence will be there.
And Clarence's parents, they had a really good marriage, so you don't know. He may be somewhere off doing family stuff.
All right, very good. Well, right here, when it comes to what's happening in the city, I can think of the people I like talking to because they're doing the blocking and tackling, the nitty-gritty, getting in there where we really find out the important things happening in Detroit. And the budget is the place where that's at. In fact, budget hearings provide insight into critical functions for our city departments. And this month alone, City Council has 46 budget hearings scheduled. But like we mentioned, these hearings can sometimes slip under the radar, and that's why Bridge Michigan has partnered with Detroit Documenters and Outlier Media to cover the hundreds of hours of testimony occurring at these meetings. To understand what's happening and what we've learned from the hearing so far, we're joined by Malachi Barrett, who is a reporter covering the city for Detroit, or for Bridge Detroit. Malachi, welcome back to the Metro.
Good morning. Blocking and tackling. I like that.
I love it too, man. You can't win the game without doing the blocking and tackling. It's not glamorous, but it's important. That's what you do out here, Malachi, at these hearings. So before we get into the specifics of what you've seen, let's just go over the city's budgeting process. How does it work? And give me a little bit more insight into what you've been monitoring.
Well, if we can extend the metaphor, it does feel like running into a tackling dummy or maybe a brick wall over and over again.
Yeah.
Normally this wouldn't get a whole lot of attention just because, as you mentioned, there's 46 of these meetings all throughout the day, all week, for hours a day, for basically 3 or 4 weeks, depending on how long city council kind of ends up deliberating at the end. And that's like really crazy for one person to really do. Shout out to Kaylee Licklider on our team. She actually did do that last year. But this year we decided that, we should partner with some of our other nonprofit newsrooms, Outlier and the Detroit Documenters, to bring in enough reporters so it's actually manageable to watch these. And it's been really interesting to see what's kind of come out of this. It's helping us make connections and find some trends between city departments, what their goals are, how they're spending your money, most importantly, right? This is all taxpayer funds that are going to different things. So who's getting to make those decisions? And we've created like this little file cabinet, basically, of briefings about city departments. They're like, if I can say this, they're like Pokemon cards showing the stats and special abilities of each city department. And that's all on our website now. You can kind of just thumb through them. So you're like, okay, what's going on with DDOT? How much money do they have for transportation? Click on that, you get a little drop-down window. Yeah. Oh, let's see about BSeed, And so it's hopefully going to be a resource for people moving forward now beyond the budget process to kind of understand more about how they're spending this money.
I don't think I've been as excited since I've got that Grant Hill rookie card that I was like, maybe this will be worth some money. I can see the stats on the back also. So you're getting me fired up. I know the law department is a place that you've been looking at, for example. That'd be one of these stats that people can check out. That strikes me as where the lawyers hang out, but why is the law department important for what the city's doing?
Yeah, well, for one thing, they help manage the Freedom Information Act requests, FOIA as we like to call it. And the city council has really actually taken issue with delays in the FOIA response that reporters use and citizens use to find access to public information. It's all public information. You are obligated to get it, but we're getting it late. And so that's one of the things that council is investigating. Is it a resource problem? Law department says no. It's more of kind of departmental problem, but that's the kind of stuff that, like, it sounds dry. You don't really know what's hiding in there until you look. Mm-hmm. Another interesting thing with the law department is they're actually suing commercial property owners right now for demolitions, right? So the city is paying to take down commercial buildings, which the mayor has said is a major source of blight in the city. And then they're trying to get that funding back from the owners. Like, hey, we took this down. You need to pay for it. And it's been a slow process because they're complicated cases. They take time. Basically, they're trying to get $3 million back from commercial property owners. And so far, they've only got a little shy of $1 million. There were 18 lawsuits filed. So those are just some things that are coming out of one department that like connects to a lot of issues that I think are important for people in the city.
No, I think that's right. You know, a phrase that I often hear and I think matters is show me what your budget is and I'll tell you what your policy priorities are, right? So if we can see where the spending is happening or what they're wrangling over, can really show you what the administration or what council, what the mayor's office is focused on. So let's dig into some of this. One of the things that we learned last month was the Detroit Department of Transportation. From them was that car crashes and fatalities in the city have been up for the last decade. So can you tell us where we sit compared to the rest of the nation and what the city plans on doing in terms of budgeting to try to improve this?
So improving safety on DDOT buses is a major goal for the department this year. They're getting a pretty substantial budget boost, $188 million total. And it's kind of twofold. So one, the rate of preventable bus crashes in Detroit is triple the national standard. So they want to get that down to about one crash per 100,000 miles, which, I don't know what that means for people, but basically we're having more crashes than is kind of the national standard, right? And then they're also making some changes for safety on buses. The transit police, which is kind of a different agency within city department, is handing that back over to the police department. And around the time of the bankruptcy, there were too few police officers to actually have on buses. That's now no longer the case. We've hired more police officers, and so they are taking over security on DDOT buses. So they're kind of twofold attacking this problem of like, one, buses are crashing into things or people are crashing into our buses more than is acceptable. And also, there's a perception of, safety issues on the bus for riders. And those two things they're hoping to kind of tackle to make it more accessible and better to ride, basically.
Yeah, which is important because public transportation is going to be important for any thriving city. It's something that we've seen from just talking to young people, for example, professionals that want to come to the area. So it's important to see a focus on that. I like what I'm hearing there. Another thing you mentioned, though, involves enforcement, blight. We often talk about blight in terms of personal property. You refer to commercial property and what the city law department is trying to do in order and related to demolition and perhaps getting some money in. So can you parse that out, and what kind of impact do we expect from that? Is this something where it might help to prevent commercial blight? What are we looking at in that space?
Yeah, so we actually learned that the number of demolitions for commercial buildings doubled in the last year, which I think illustrates this shift that the mayor has been talking about, where for a long time we were really focused on city-owned buildings and houses, older houses and land bank properties and getting those down. Now it's kind of shifted more toward commercial buildings. And what we found is that the city is being aggressive on taking those down and suing owners for being a public nuisance after the fact to recover the costs of that. And that's going to take some time. They're also issuing more blight tickets. There was more blight tickets issued last year. But another kind of issue with this is they've only collected payment for about 16% of those. So it seems like the city is, being very quick on handling these issues and then figuring out how to maybe not pay for it later, but getting the full funding back later because, there's a big gap there in the blight tickets that need to be collected. People might be interested to know there were 35 illegal marijuana facilities that were closed in 2023.
Oh, my.
Yeah. And that's the thing. People, come in complaints, but really in District 3 and like the northeast side of the city, people worry about like proliferation of like marijuana. And you're like, we have a legal process now that's been set up for this. But yeah, 35 illegal operations were shut down last year. I would love to know more about that, right?
That is intriguing, right? Because I think part of the concern some folks have is if once you make it legal, maybe it's harder to kind of enforce the illegal operations. So seeing how that balances out, especially for safety, will be really interesting. But for you, as I mentioned, there's several different areas that budgeting's happening that I've seen here on the website. You can go to BridgeDetroit.com and see how they've listed it all out. But for you, what are you going to be taking a close look at as we finish out the process this month?
Yeah, let me just rapid fire thing because this is like
go through.
We love like services, right? So they're doing more fire inspections, right? They're replacing more streetlights. 10 years ago, they came in and they had this big plan to replace streetlights. Well, those are old now. It's time for them to be swapped out. They might issue some bonds to pay for that. They're adding more bus shelters. There's some library renovations. The cultural centers in the city are asking for more money to upgrade their facilities as well. So that's a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in. Like those are things that really I think connect to like people's experience in the city here. Also, we've learned that there are some things last year that were funded that didn't end up happening. So a big one is home air filters for residents near the Stellantis plants on the east side. They were supposed to get some home filters with some budget money that the city council set aside. Apparently that didn't happen. So why is that? I mean, a lot of things like that, I think we're going to be continuing to follow up on.
Yeah, this is key, right? I mean, one of the things that I hope that we can touch back on is not only what we plan to do, but so often what we said we were going to do can kind of fall through the tracks, following up on that. Why didn't that get accomplished? What was happening? What can we do to try to improve the process moving forward? So I appreciate your attention to that. I cut you off, though. Continue.
No, I'm just, to your point there, I mean, I think that's what's great about this is that it's going to remain out there for people to check in with throughout the year. And this is why it's important to support, newsrooms in your city, because together this partnership has been able to create this public resource and this record for people and hopefully make it like accessible and easy to understand. I know this is like budget's kind of dry stuff. Like it's not super exciting, but
I'm pretty excited right now.
I think there's some cool stuff in there, obviously.
Yeah, right? I mean, come on. It's pretty fun. Maybe we should put some like really funky music underneath us while we're talking about it so that you can understand the real excitement that's happening here. But Malachi, can't keep you the whole time. Before we get out of here, I know you've been covering a little bit benefits for overtaxed homeowners. So if you can give me just, got about a minute to get into that, I'll take it.
Yeah, basically the city took a bunch of people's money. They overtaxed them, and residents want to get paid back for it. And there's some legal constraints that are making that tough. The council president continues to explore some options there, but basically has been told that it would be illegal to give people cash payments. So they're doing little things like giving you preference on some programs, but it's a big fight that I think is still out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to have to do it there, but we're going to keep monitoring this. As we said, the month's not even over. Malachi Barrett, you've got some meetings to cover. So, reporter with for the city of Detroit, for BridgeDetroit, covering the city of Detroit, Malachi Barrett, thanks for joining us on the Metro.
My pleasure.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET, where I'm Nick Austin, joined by, of course, co-host Tia Graham, who's coming up in just a moment. But before we get into more of the news you need to know, I want to let you know right now about some of the things happening here in Detroit, including, speaking of our budget and money, Moody's Investor Services has restored Detroit's bond rating to investment grade for the first time in 15 years. The agency cites strong financial management since the city emerged from bankruptcy, as well as growth in jobs and revenue. Mayor Mike Duggan and Chief Financial Officer Jay Rising will share more details later today at a news conference.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. And if you are like me, or if you're like Oakland fans, you definitely feel what we're feeling right now. Our teams did not make it to the Sweet 16. That's a Spartan fan here. We didn't make it. We didn't march on. We didn't go forward. So, here we are around the country. Many eyes are on the men's and women's college basketball. And that's because it's March, of course, and that means March Madness and all the exciting basketball games that follow this year. Several men's Cinderella teams have made it past their first game, but not their second one, we know. NPR's Steve Inskeep spoke with Nicole Auerbach with The Athletic about this year's tournament. They began by discussing Oakland University's surprising defeat over Kentucky.
We'll remember Oakland and what it meant for Greg Campy, who's been the head of that program for 40 years, and Jack Golke and those threes that he drained. But ultimately, those Cinderella teams did not make it through the weekend. We only have one double-digit seed making it all the way to the Sweet 16, and that's NC State, a team that has won a lot of games in the last 12 days, but was on the outside looking in before the ACC tournament. Otherwise, it's been very chalky. We have all of the number 1 and number 2 seeds through to the Sweet 16 for just the 5th time in NCAA tournament history.
Yeah, I will confess there's another team that I follow because I'm from Indiana originally, so I was following Purdue, and I'm a little shocked they didn't lose in the first or second round. How are they doing?
Yeah, well, I think everyone was holding their breath on Purdue because of those early exits and double-digit C's, and of course the 16 last year. But, this is a better team. They have better guard play, more experienced guard play. And Zach Edey, he's big, but as Matt Painter will tell you, that is not his only skill set. He is the National Player of the Year back-to-back years for a reason. And when they play through him, he does have things like a double-double by halftime. It makes it very, very difficult, but they looked fantastic in the round of 32.
Why don't you describe for those who do not follow every day, since we have non-regular fans, what's a double-double?
Double-double it's really two of any category. So for him, it's usually points and rebounds. But I'll tell you, I was watching UConn, the number 1 overall seed, who also looks fantastic here in Brooklyn. And Donovan Clingan almost had 10 blocks as well. So he almost had a triple-double with blocks, which is very, very difficult to do. But Zach Edey is a walking double-double. He is always going to score a ton of points. He's always going to get a ton of rebounds. He's 7'4". He's basically a foot taller than most players on the court.
What do you make of the women's side when you've been paying attention over there?
The women's tournament has been a lot of fun as well. A lot of the higher seeds were winning in that first round, but we started to see some upsets. And on the women's side, if you're a top 4 seed, you are hosting games. So Duke, a number 7 seed, upset number 2 Ohio State on Sunday, and they did that in Columbus, so it's doubly difficult as well. We also saw a Stanford-Iowa State game that I think was the game of the tournament, or either tournament, that went to overtime, and the shot making was fantastic before the Cardinal eked it out late on Sunday night. So there's still games to be played today, including Iowa and the Hawkeyes, who looked a little shaky in round 1, but it's been fantastic. It's also setting up for some incredible regional round action next week on the women's side.
That was NPR's Steve Inskeep speaking with Nicole Auerbach, reporter with The Athletic, about the NCAA tournament. This is the Metro.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET, and coming up, we'll talk about the challenges and successes of a Nigerian Detroiter who moved to the city when he was a kid. You're listening to the Metro on 1019 WDET. This is the Metro on 1019 WDET. I am Nick Austin, and I am joined by Tia Graham.
Indeed, indeed. Just taking a quick look at the weather forecast. As you heard from Amanda LeClaire, it's going to be a high around 62 degrees today. We may see a little wind gust up to 23 miles per hour, but definitely warmer. Tuesday, we could see some rain before 11 a.m. Otherwise, a high around 60 degrees. So it's looking pretty good here in the city of Detroit. And speaking of Detroit, it does have a unique ability to connect people from all walks of life. Recently, a Detroiter wrote an autobiographical account of his life, one that began in a small village in Nigeria and continued onwards to the west side of Detroit. Madu Zito explored the ways his family unit struggled and thrived in our city in the book. And the book follows Madu's life, his challenges, adjusting to the new culture here in the city, the ways he was put in a position to support his family and found strength through himself and as well as his family, as well through the city of Detroit. Here is that conversation with Madu.
Well, I think it felt like such a dream or daze at first, right? Like, 'cause it just doesn't feel real when you're like a child, right? Like your whole life is being uprooted and you don't really know why, and you're like you don't have a say in it, and like before you know it, you're just in this completely different world with road lights and stop signs and like winter, and then going to school and like, you know, in Detroit all of a sudden, like you've never even heard of Detroit before, and suddenly you're in a place that's like Detroit. So it's like it felt like such a surreal dream, right? You're just a kid and you're not really thinking about these things. It just feels like you're in such a dream until I think the hard reality starts setting in, right? Like where me, my dad, my older brother, and my sister were the first 4 to come. So we were like in this one room on this, like in this house. So we were renting out a room and we were all just there around the space heater together in the winters. And then my mom and like the other siblings come, and we're all like 8 people in one room while my dad is like getting a part-time job at Rite Aid. And it's just like, oh, this is a hard reality. This is no more, you're no longer like walking around in the village and being around your cousins and like everyone. There's like that sort of freedom is gone all of a sudden. So there was just that moment where it was like, okay, this is a whole different reality, and you're going to have to find a way to survive in this one.
So the book has a strong theme surrounding family. You go into your relationship with your father. So what did you learn about yourself, as well as what did you learn about your father?
There was like that very particular moment that I write about where, you know, when you're in a tense relationship with someone, even when you're in a cordial way, you still feel so tense around them. And there was that very particular moment where I was like going somewhere, and my dad was asking where I was going, and I like was very defensive about it. And then he had made the comment that he doesn't know why I hate him so much. And like, it was this thing where I was like, oh, like he doesn't hold on to this thing as much as I do, right? For him, it was just like this very particular time that happened, and it was like over. And then for me, like, you know, it became like one of the defining sort of relationships in my life. And so I remember seeing that, but also like, you know, there's a moment where you see your parents start getting older, and like you actually see them like physically start getting older. Like not just like you have the knowledge that the days are going by, but like you look at your dad or your mom and you're like, oh, you're a fragile creature now. Like you're a very like fragile human being.
It's hard.
Yeah. And so I think sort of the power that I had in that sense was like making a decision of like, okay, look, me and my father were really close before, and we've been like, and this situation is over. This time period is over. And so to sort of, and like the thing that I say is like, I won the fight, right? It's like, it was a fight for control, and I had won the fight completely. And so it was like, well, what do you do now with your victory? Which was like me looking at him and going like, all right, I want this relationship to be reestablished, but on a much more like equal, balanced ground. And so it was just simply that like me engaging with him on a much more like a stable power level rather than like one of domination. So, but it was also the thing of like recognizing, even in the worst moments, how much they had depended on me, right? Like I write so much about going with them in their master's class, like be with them and take notes and like help them with their work and typing all these things. And even when I was in Venice, I was, and they, you know, they're teachers, so they were doing stuff, remote instruction. And I was basically remoted into all their computers and like helping them and like fixing all the issues while I was working as well. So I remember it was like my mom sort of bringing it up, like, you know, through all of this, we sort of depended on you to like help out, right? Like I sold ice cream with my dad for like 4 summers, even when we hated each other, because he also just trusted that I was going to be the best person like to accompany him selling ice cream. But you just don't notice how much what that means back then, because like right then I was like, it's just this tense relationship with me and him. And so it like feels like a punishment that he's making me go sell ice cream with him every summer. But it's actually just like, you're someone that I trust that we're going to do this well together. And like, I could trust riding in the car with you for like 10 hours every single day. So it's like recognizing those things and going like, oh, like I've missed it, like half or 60% of this story as well.
I often think about the African diaspora, which includes you and me and all those who are scattered across the world, the globe, honestly. And I think about just the differences of growing up in different places and spaces. I grew up in the United States of America. You did as well, but you started life out in Nigeria. So what was it like trying to fit in when you did arrive to Detroit?
You know, whenever you go somewhere, there's always going to be people that want to see if you could be bullied, right? It's the sort of human desire for like domination. But like, I just did not have the context of you're supposed to let some things go. Like, I just always had, like, I was kind of hot-headed when I was young. So I'm just like, no, I'm about to swing back on you. There's no sort of like negotiation here. But I remember and I was always in trouble. Like, I was in detention all the time. They put me in like volleyball to deal with the anger problem. So I got really good at volleyball as well. But I remember a very particular moment that it changed for me was when we were in gym class and we were playing basketball, and I'd never played basketball in my life. So every time in gym class, I just had no idea what to do. Like, I'm a soccer player. I could play soccer all day. I could dribble all day. But, like, in basketball, I was like, yeah, I'm all linked up here. And so, I just got really good at, like, shooting threes. It was just like, no, if I just aim for the square, it's always going to go in. And I think that was, like, a very defining moment where it's like, I think you get a lot of leeway, even as a kid, if you're good at sports. And once, like, people find out that you're good at sports, you, like, make a whole new cast of friends. People just see you in a different light. And so it was like, oh, I could just be sporty. Like, I'm really good at sports. Like, there's no soccer here. You know, I basically turned into a spot up shooter in gym class, and it just, like, opened up my world completely.
And when people ask you, you usually say you're from Detroit. You usually say that's home. What does Detroit mean to you?
I can trace any part of myself, and they'll, like, just land back in Detroit. Like, I have a very particular pride of being from the West Side and not from the East Side, because the East Side is, like, the Wild Wild West. And I'm always just like, at least the West Side is, like, you know, it's cool, it's calm. It's not particularly calm, but it's calm in a way. And so it's like, even the East Side, West Side thing, like, when I hear my friends talk about growing up in the East Side, I'm like, yeah, you grew up in the Wild West. I'm sorry, but the West Side is much better than that. So it's like, so much of my identity is tied into it, or tied into the city of Detroit. And I think at a certain point, it's probably when I was, like, listening to Stretch Money, and I was like, yeah, I'm probably a Detroiter now.
Stretch Money, the man, you understand that? Hot lava, wild weed.
It takes money to make money. I can't let it get away from me. So every day I'm in
That was Madhu Zito, the author of The Minotaur at Kalilanza. The book goes on sale April 2nd.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET, and Michigan reported its first COVID-19 death about 4 years ago. While Michiganders are much safer today because of vaccinations, the disease has killed more than 40,000 people statewide since the pandemic began. Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian is the state health department's chief medical officer. She sat down with WDET's Pat Batchelor to explain why the disease is not only more predictable today, it's also more easily managed by health experts.
We know a lot more about transmission and prevention. We have vaccines that are incredibly effective at preventing death and severe complications. We've got tests that are readily available, including home tests for it. And then we've got therapeutics that, again, are really helpful and can prevent serious complications and death.
What, if anything, do we still not know yet?
Well, one of the things that we still need to do a lot of work on is studying the impacts of long COVID. Because this virus has only been with us for 4 years, we don't know what the longer term implications are. What happens at 5 years and 10 years, and what are some of the impacts that this could even have on things like lifespan?
Hindsight, of course, is 2020, no pun intended there. But looking back over the last 4 years, what measures worked and which ones didn't?
Well, one of the things that I have to think about, and you may not consider this a public health measure. I certainly do. And that is the measure of public trust. Public trust in public health and governmental agencies and organizations is something that has really declined. And I think we were not aware of how much things had faltered before COVID-19. Now that we're aware of this, I think one of the very important lessons we have to learn is, how do we rebuild that trust? How do we rebuild all of the trust and momentum that we lost over the last 4 years? And how do we make sure that the public is willing to trust us when the next emergency or public health threat happens? And I think that means a whole lot more communication, but also differences in how we communicate. I think that a lot of the precautions and preventative measures that were communicated out in the beginning of the pandemic, they were not necessarily wrong decisions or bad decisions, but they weren't communicated with a nuanced perspective about how data changes and our uncertainty at the time. And I think if that nuance had been communicated a little bit better, folks would have understood that people were making the best decisions based on the existing information and that things could change.
You talked about long COVID. We also know that the pandemic has had a significant impact on our children, particularly as it pertains to their education. What would you do differently? I mean, if you had to do it over as far as minimizing the impact on our kids' learning?
Well, I think we all learned a lot. We learned about some of these other implications of some of the decisions that were being made. And so I think, again, when some of those decisions were made and when they were communicated out, having that understanding of the complications and the nuance and the uncertainty and having those types of discussions, I think those were really important. And these are all things that we can learn and be better prepared for next time. And when I say next time, there will be a next public health threat. There will be a next emergency. And so I think that making sure that we're having these types of dialogue and communication, it's really important in preparing for whatever lies ahead.
That was my next and final question. Nobody can predict the future, but based on what we know right now, what we've learned, are we prepared for new variants? And are we better equipped to handle the next pandemic, which hopefully doesn't happen in any of our lifetimes?
Well, there are lots of efforts underway, but we have to remember that for decades, public health was underfunded and often ignored. And so I think that one of the things we need to focus on is rebuilding the infrastructure of public health. And then again, having that communication and rebuilding some of the public's trust that was lost. The next pandemic may look nothing at all like COVID. It may not be a respiratory virus. It may be something completely and altogether different. But what I want to flag for your listeners is that as we're thinking ahead, we also have to remember the past and diseases that we have already eliminated in this country. As we see vaccine rates decline, there is very real possibilities of reemergence. We very recently, we just had 3 introductions of measles within a very short period of time in our state. And we're seeing global upticks in diseases like measles. And as our vaccination rates go down, we remain particularly vulnerable to those types of upticks. And so as we look ahead to new and emerging threats, we also have to look into history at threats we had successfully eliminated, and could they come back? Because we've simply taken our eye off the ball and aren't using some of the tools that are already in existence. I did want to add one piece about COVID and how we think about COVID holistically. And one of the things that I want to remind your listeners is that as we have tools for COVID-19, we really need to start thinking about respiratory viral season holistically. So it's not just about COVID anymore. COVID is starting to follow the same seasonal trends that we see for other diseases like influenza and RSV. And there are also numerous other viruses that transmit during those time periods as well. We have tools for COVID, for influenza, and for RSV. And so again, it means looking ahead and making sure that people are utilizing those tools. Flu vaccine rates were lower this year than they have been in several years. We had new tools for RSV that there was relatively sluggish uptake on those tools utilization as well. And so as we think about future respiratory seasons, I just want to remind your listeners that there will be an annual flu vaccine, an annual COVID vaccine. We recommend getting those in the fall. It's not too late to get them now if you did not receive them last fall. And then if you have little ones in your home, make sure that they're getting those RSV tools as well.
That was Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian speaking with WDET's Pat Batchelor. This is The Metro.
Coming up on the Metro, we'll talk about what the state is doing to attract new businesses. But first, the city of Detroit has completed $1.5 million of improvements to Baldock Park, the largest park on the city's east side. The American Rescue Plan Act and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan's Strategic Neighborhood Fund paid for the renovations. Improvements include new sidewalks, a larger playground, a picnic shelter, and dog park. Crews also installed new infrastructure to address chronic flooding in the park's south And once again, this is the Metro. You all stay right there.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET, and the Michigan Senate passed a series of bills to attract and retain business to the state. So WDET's Shana Roth and Zach Gorchow spoke about the state's new business development plan on the Mishmash podcast.
The Michigan Senate passed a whole series of bills essentially designed to augment the types of tax incentives and cash incentives the state uses to attract and retain businesses in Michigan. Michigan does not have a research and development tax credit. These bills would create one. These bills would also bring back but dramatically change a tax incentive program designed to encourage companies to hire employees by letting the employer keep their state income tax withholdings for those employees instead of remitting them to the state. And then the big subject that Democrats in Lansing lately have been talking about is community benefits. And one of the bills that passed would take half of a very large pot of money, $500 million, half of that, and put it toward almost anything that would qualify as a community benefit.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't Governor Whitmer pitch the idea of the SOAR Fund as a way to win big projects to the state, like the Ford electric vehicle plant in Marshall? I mean, how likely is she to support something like this?
Well, not likely at all, I don't think. You know, our listeners may remember we asked the governor about an earlier version of what the Senate passed that would have redirected 20% of funds toward community benefits. Now it's 50% from a much bigger pot of money. The governor wants that pot of money available solely as cash incentives to attract businesses and doesn't want it carved up. Here's what Governor Whitmer said about that 20% idea in January.
My goal is to make sure that we are able to outcompete other states and earn investment of incumbent businesses as they grow here, and others, you know, we want them to call their home Michigan.
Well, we spoke to Quentin Messer, the leader of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, on Monday, and this was before the Senate unveiled and passed this proposal to redirect 50% of funds to communities. We asked him about the earlier 20% proposal, and this is what he said.
Ultimately, elected officials will deem what they perceive the best way of executing the Make It in Michigan economic development strategy focused on people, places, and projects. It is not my place to opine on whether or not I believe the efficacy of it. And I think the Make It in Michigan strategy allows for there to be support and help companies de-risk their investment, but also the place portion allows for there to be investment in the cultivation and revitalization of communities, and the people part allows us to make sure that we develop the most important asset that Michigan has, which are the people who live here in the state.
That was Chief Executive Officer for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, Quentin Messer. You can hear more of the conversation with Shana and Zach on the Mishmash podcast. But right now, you can hear more In the Groove with Ryan Patrick Hooper at noon today. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing good. I'm feeling so grateful coming out of fundraiser and hitting that goal, and so thankful to everyone that made a gift during In the Groove and other parts of WDET. And, you know, spring fundraiser, pretty exhausting for us, for the listener too. So today, so little talking, so much music. I will leave you alone and let you just vibe out. This is the ultimate thank you gift for helping us reach our goal. 3 hours of music, so little of me. I'm just going to make your Shazam sweat with lots of new music. That's coming up on In the Groove on WDET.
Ryan. All right, Ryan, we're going to get it sweating in here. Thanks a lot, Ryan. In the Groove coming up next. That's the Metro for March 25th, 2024. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrant. Our technical director is Nate Bender, and music by Sam Bobians. Our news director is Jerome Vaughn, and our program director is Adam Fox.
The Metro is a WDET production, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate.
This is 1019 WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio. Your connection to news, music, and conversation. We'll see you tomorrow.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.